An accident yoinks the Enterprise back in time to Earth in the late 1960s. And before they can get the ship back up and running, they're spotted by the Air Force. They send a jet pilot to see what the heck that thing is on their radar, and Scotty gets things working just in time to snatch the pilot out of his plane before he can make a report. But now they got a dilemma. They can't send him back with knowledge about the future, but they can't keep him without changing the past. Where's Doc Brown when you need him, when the clock is telling you that tomorrow is yesterday? Hit it!
Hey!
A whole bunch of new faces this week, but we'll just talk about the big ones. First, you got Hal Lynch as the Air Police Sergeant. A full-time guest star, Hal showed up in a lot of westerns and cop-type shows. The Fugitive, Bonanza, Mod Squad, Dragnet, and Mannix. Da-dun-da-dun. Playing Colonel Fellini is Ed Peck. One of those, hey, it's that guy kind of guys. Ed was everywhere. Recurring roles in Happy Days, Benson, Barney Miller, and The Super. He played the titular Major Del Conway of the Flying Tigers, voiced Jack Jingley in The Last Unicorn. But if you're my age and you still can't place where you've seen this guy, smart money is probably on this right here.
What did they ask for? Whatever it is, they can have it.
They want your case of Wonka bars. Miss Curtis, did you hear me? It's your husband's life or your case of Wonka bars.
How long will they give me to think it over?
Roger Perry plays our main guest star this week, Captain John Christopher. Another prolific television actor of the time, Raj was probably best known at the time for leading roles in Harrigan and Son and Arrest and Trial. He would later go on to have recurring roles on shows like The Facts of Life and Falcon Crest. He was also the head elf in The Elf Who Saved Christmas. So, Raj was no slouch. And last, but definitely not least, let's give a huge watching stuff welcome to John Winston as Transporter Technician Kyle. He don't have a name in this episode, but he'll reprise his role as Kyle in 10 more episodes and Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan. Only 14 credits on his resume, but they include hit shows like The Man from U.N.C.L.E., Time Tunnel, Max Headroom, and even the fan-made series Star Trek New Voyages, though he don't play Kyle in that one for some reason. Weird. Anyways, without further ado, let's get into the plot. We open in a completely different show. Air Force fighter jets are taxiing around, and we cut to a very small radar room where a radar tech has picked up a crazy big aircraft that seems to have just appeared at high altitude over Omaha. His CO alerts air defense that they've spotted a UFO, and they scramble a fighter to go check it out. An F-104 starfighter takes off to see what's up, and we finally get an idea of what's going on when we see that the UFO is none other than our beloved USS Enterprise, and she don't look like she's doing too good. After the opening credits, the captain's log tells us that the ship ran into what Kirk calls a black star, and the gravitational pull of the thing caused the Enterprise to use all of its power just to escape. But once they broke free, all of that power shot them across the galaxy at crazy speeds and out of control. And they just came out of it, but they have no idea where they are. All the power is out, but Scotty manages to get it back on. Kirk calls for a damage report, and then tells Uhura to get in touch with Starfleet so he can tell him where that friggin' black hole is. Spock determines that they're orbiting Earth. They were kind of pointed in that direction when they squirted out of the black hole. Ew. So that seems to make sense. Uhura, though, says she can't get nothing but static on the phone, but says that she's getting something on a completely different frequency. It's a radio newscast talking about the first manned moonshot that's supposed to happen next Wednesday at 6 a.m. from Cape Kennedy. And it ain't the History Channel. Kirk and crew have been dropped smack dab in the late 1960s. To coin a phrase, great Scott. No time to sit around awestruck, though. Uhura is picking up communications between the ground and an approaching fighter. Spock sees it on the sensors too. They try to get the ship out of the atmosphere before it gets there, but Sulu says Helm is still sluggish from the accident and it's slow going. Too late, the pilot has spotted the Enterprise and is reporting back on it. Ground orders the pilot to disable the UFO and force it to land. Yeah, good luck with that. Spock warns, though, that the fighter could be armed with nukes. Kirk orders a tractor beam on the fighter to hold it in place. Turns out fighter jets aren't really built to stand up to Federation tractor beams, and they crush it like a beer can off of my Uncle Ted's forehead. But they do manage to beam the pilot aboard before he gets sardined over here. He shows up in the transporter room and is immediately in awe of the eyelight technology as Shatner welcomes him aboard. The pilot identifies himself as Air Force Captain John Christopher, and Kirk does what he can to assure the guy that they're buddies and he ain't in no danger. Even offers to show him around. On the way to the bridge, Kirk tells Christopher that there are 12 ships like the Enterprise in the fleet. Christopher seems pretty impressed because, well, duh. And speaking of well, duh, Kirk tells Christopher that the Enterprise is from the future. They make it to the bridge, and Christopher meets his very first alien, Mr. Spock. Not having seen any of the Back to the Future movies, Kirk invites Christopher to have a look around and see what he thinks about stuff. Spock, however, loves those movies and tells Kirk they can't return Christopher to Earth with the knowledge he already has, and thanks to Kirk telling him, me starship, Sue starship, he's soaking up more problematic information by the second. At this rate, he says, we're just going to end up with a goofy photo of a well with no McFlys in it at all. Kirk tells Spock to get this guy down to wardrobe and get him some space duds, and then meet him in his quarters. Spock and Christopher, now sporting a fresh new gold Starfleet uniform, show up in Kirk's quarters as he's recording an after-incident report detailing the damage and yada yada yada. The computer, for some reason, sounds like a phone sex operator, which Christopher finds to be a hoot. Spock explains that the IT department of Cygnet 14, a planet made up predominantly of women, upgraded their library computer and, noticing it didn't have a personality of its own, decided to install one based on Kim Cattrall from Sex and the City after about 5 double Cosmos. It's at this point that Kirk breaks the news to Christopher that he's going to have to remain a guest of the future indefinitely. He takes the news about as well as you would expect. In a pretty impressive bit of temporal thinking for a guy from the 60s, he points out that keeping him could also change the future. But Spock basically tells him he lives a completely uneventful life, and history would be just fine if he up and disappeared. Sorry, Flyboy, George Bailey, you are not. Right then, Scotty calls in and tells Kirk that he's almost got the engines repaired, but even with good engines, they're stuck in the past. Christopher points out that it looks like they're all in the same boat. After a commercial break, Kirk is recording a log entry, basically getting folks up to speed if they're just tuning in. And the computer throws a little more of that cybermatum at him. He records on the computer that he thinks the computer needs to be wiped or scrapped, and the computer pouts. It's fun. Spock cuts in and says he's found out something about Christopher and needs to see both him and the captain immediately. When Kirk tries to call Christopher, though, he ain't in his quarters. Kirk calls security and tells them to meet him at the transporter room. We see Christopher sneaking around, and he clobbers a red shirt and grabs his phaser. He walks into the transporter room and tells Mr. Kyle to beam him back to Earth. But just then, the captain shows up and gives Christopher a +5 Kirk punch and knocks him out cold. Well, a visit to sickbay has to follow a Kirk punch. If left untreated, a Kirk punch can cause your soul to hemorrhage. And while he's recovering, Kirk and McCoy reiterate the problems they have with keeping Christopher, and how it's even worse considering the 430 people on the Enterprise are stuck in the past and can't go down to Earth without causing a much bigger problem than Christopher could even dream of causing. Kirk wonders, if they do get back to the future, what's that going to be like for Christopher? McCoy feels confident he can be retrained, but Kirk worries that he won't be able to be retrained to forget his family. Christopher wakes up and agrees with him. Spock shows up and lets everyone in on the new thing he's found out about Christopher. While his life is pretty much uninteresting and ends in mediocrity, his kid Sean is going to lead the first manned mission to Saturn. Problem is, Sean ain't even been conceived yet, much less born. Therefore, Spock says, we gotta get this guy back so he can knock up his old lady and she can grump out a hero. Well, now that our gang has a new mission, Kirk, Spock, and Christopher are in the conference room hashing out a plan. Spock says Christopher's tractor beam to hell plane crashed in a field in Kansas, which probably means search parties have already found it and know that there ain't no Christopher in there. They're gonna need a reason Christopher showed up without a scratch. Also, Chrissy says he turned on his wing cameras when he made the visual contact with the Enterprise, so they've got great shots of something they ain't supposed to have great shots of, not to mention the air defense people were recording his radio transmissions, so they need to grab that too. Kirk mentions that he remembers that UFO sightings in this time were usually chalked up to weather balloons and swamp gas and whatnot. Spock is like, yeah, but swamp gas never crushed a friggin' fighter jet. Kirk's like, alright, fair enough. So what about getting our asses back to the future? Spock says, I'm working on it. In the meantime, Kirk says we gotta at least break into the Strategic Air Command base and steal the evidence of our existence, so even if Christopher does report what he saw, there would be no corroborating evidence. Chrissy seems kinda okay with this meaning he'll look like a whack job. He says he knows the base like the back of his hand, but Kirk says you ain't coming. If something happens to you, we're kinda screwed, so you're staying here. He offers to sketch out the base for them instead, so they'll know where to find the stuff. Cut to said base, and Kirk and Sulu beam down into a friggin' hallway where an Air Force guard had just walked through. They find the records room that they probably should have beamed directly into, and Kirk uses a sonic screwdriver to unlock the door. They spot a primitive computer, which Kirk calls a primitive computer, and start to work. Up on the ship, McCoy is pacing, worried about Kirk and Sulu. Spock reminds him that it's gonna take more time because they're creepsing around, and that's slow going. McCoy snaps that Spock should be working on his time travel problem. Spock says he's doing that right now, actually. Mr. Kyle is just trying to stay out of it. Back in the records room, Kirk and Sulu are pulling the tapes out of the primitive computers when an Air Force sergeant with a revolver comes in and detains our boys. He tells them to hand over the bag with the tapes and their phaser belts. On the ship, Spock decides this is the time to check in on the captain, and one of the communicators on the belts that the sergeant has beeps. When he tries to figure out what the hell the thing is, he accidentally activates the emergency signal. Spock orders the captain beamed up immediately, but since the sergeant is the one with the communicator, he's beamed up instead. In the transporter chamber, the sergeant freezes. Honestly, not a bad response to what just happened to him. He must have dropped the rest of the stuff when he opened the communicator, because the other one is still on Earth, and Kirk uses it to call the Enterprise and let them know that they're okay. And obviously, Spock needs to do some more Ancestry.com research and see if this Yutz is worth sending back too. Kirk and Sulu continue grabbing computer tapes and go looking for the photo lab. They find it, but when they go in, they set off an alarm in the security station, and security guys head to investigate. Kirk says they're just about ready to go, but he's gonna check the files just in case, whatever the hell that means. Sulu stays in the darkroom and starts to call the Enterprise. As Kirk leaves the darkroom, though, he runs into the security guys and starts a fight with them. Sulu hears this and calls for a beam-up. After a scuffle, the security guys subdue Kirk and take him into custody. The security chief questions Kirk about who he is and how he got in, and Kirk actually answers truthfully, knowing this guy ain't gonna buy it. The chief threatens to lock Kirk up for 200 years, and Kirk says, yeah, that ought to do it. On the ship, Spock, Sulu, McCoy, and Christopher are discussing what to do. Chrissy says Kirk's likely being held in the security facility and he can give Spock the coordinates to beam someone down, but he ain't gonna unless he can go too. Spock reluctantly agrees and tells Sulu to issue phasers to himself and Spock only and lock them on stun. Then the three beam down. Sergeant Skippy is still in the transporter room and sees all of this go down. He takes it pretty well considering. Then Kyle offers him something to eat. The Sarge asks for some chicken soup, and Kyle slides a card into one of the 3 food replicators that are in the transporter room for some reason, and out comes some chicken soup. The Sarge is impressed. The 3 beam down, find Kirk, and as Kirk knocks the security chief out, we finally discover his name is Fellini. I was wondering about that. As Christopher is dragging in one of the guards they knocked out outside, we see that he pulls the guard's pistol and he hides it behind his back. When Kirk tells Sulu to signal Kyle to beam the 4 of them up, Christopher pulls his pistol and tells Kirk he ain't going nowhere. Kirk is like, you have got to be kidding me. While Kirk keeps him talking though, Spock sneaks around behind him and nerve pinches his ass. With all 4 back up on the ship and no hard feelings, Spock explains his plan to get the Enterprise back to the future. They're going to try to replicate what got him there in the first place by doing a slingshot maneuver around the sun. He says they'll actually go back in time first as they approach the sun, so they'll be able to drop off Christopher and the Soup Master down there before any of this happened once they turn around and start going forward in time. Oh, don't act like this makes any less sense than any other time travel movie. Now, Scotty points out that it's gonna be rough, and he might not have enough braking control to keep from overshooting their own time. They could accidentally end up in Star Trek The Next Generation, which is a little ironic considering that 3 of the people in this room actually do end up showing up in that series. Anyways, the Enterprise leaves Earth orbit, heading for the sun. Christopher becomes unofficially the first human to travel to and beyond the orbit of the moon. They start the maneuver, and Chrissy reports to the transporter room. Stuff gets rough, lots of camera tilts, and then the maneuver is complete and they're hurtling through time. As the Enterprise swings back by Earth, they beam Christopher back into himself in the jet. He doesn't seem to remember anything, and from his perspective, the Enterprise has disappeared. And then they do the same thing with the Sergeant just before he comes into the records room and catches Kirk and Sulu. He looks in, and they're not there this time. He also has apparently forgotten everything that's happened. The Enterprise continues to their own time, and Scotty reverses engines. Lots more camera tilts and crew members flying around, and then we're back. Starfleet is once again on the horn trying to find out what happened. Kirk responds in another of those really helpful status reports that, quote, "The Enterprise is home, Kirk out." That's it. And we roll credits. Great stuff. So much great stuff in this episode. Let's start with some great lines.
But maybe he could be retrained, re-educated. Now you're sounding like Spock. If you're gonna get nasty, I'm gonna leave.
Always love some McCoy Spock snark. This is kind of akin to Spock's running gag about anything human being attributed to him being taken as an insult. Spock and McCoy, you gotta love it.
You got all the way inside here without tripping any alarm. How did you do it?
Believe me, Colonel, you wouldn't believe me.
Now, don't try to be funny. How did you get in?
I popped in out of thin air.
It's a little tropey at this point, but I still love when someone in Kirk's position here actually tells the truth because they know they're not going to be believed. It's just fun.
What is that? Is that a uniform of some kind?
This little thing, something I slipped on.
Kirk, maybe you don't realize.
Captain Kirk is a serious character. He's the grim and capable leader, the hero when the situation calls for it. He's fair and inspires loyalty from his crew. But I love that we're bringing more comedy into this series. We'll talk more about this later, but seeing Shatner able to loosen up a little and bring the levity is a treat, and he really does well with it.
It is a fact, Doctor, that prowling by stealth is more time-consuming than a direct approach. In our case,
Shouldn't you be working on your time warp calculations, Mr. Spock?
I am.
Now, we've known that Spock is hyper-intelligent since the pilot, but this is the first time we really see the Mentat-level mental calculations that Spock is capable of. I think it's really an escalation in what's been depicted as Spock's mental capability up to this point, but I like it. It accentuates just how alien this guy is beyond the pointiness of ear and eyebrow. There are also little touches they threw in here, whether they were the writers' ideas or the directors or the actors themselves, hard to say, but they're really great. For instance, I love that Kirk and Sulu are kind of geeking out about being in what to them would be ancient Earth. They shake it off and get down to business when serious situations start happening, but it's nice to see the characters reacting in such a relatable way like that. Another lovely touch is when Colonel Fellini is goofing with the phaser and Kirk is visibly uncomfortable, for good reason, but a reason only he is aware of. I especially love the look on Kirk's face when Fellini tosses the phaser to his buddy. I mean, who hasn't made this face when someone is screwing around with something they don't really understand and do something really stupid with it, and you're just waiting for the crash or the explosion or whatever to happen? A cool little detail courtesy of the wardrobe department, you'll notice that Air Force Captain Christopher is sporting a uniform with a single stripe on the sleeves. This establishes his rank as lieutenant. Well, Starfleet uses naval ranks, and in the Navy, a lieutenant is what's known as an O3, which means he's an officer, O, at the third level of rank, 3. O3 in the Air Force is captain. so they put his actual rank on his Starfleet uniform. Now, it's kind of problematic to give just some guy an actual rank insignia on an actual uniform, but if they're going to do it, it's nice to see that they made it the right rank. Last thing I want to bring up is this fun little callback.
Mr. Scott is still with us.
Which refers to these lines from the beginning of the episode.
Auxiliaries.
If Mr. Scott is still with us, auxiliaries should be on momentarily. Are you all right, Lieutenant? Mr. Scott is still with us.
It's an easily missable detail, and they don't point at it at all, but if you got it, it's a neat little bonus. I like stuff like that they put in there just in case you get it. If you don't, no biggie, we're moving on. And speaking of moving on, the Goof. I'm not going to talk too much about the mechanics of time travel as they are depicted in this episode. Honestly, it never actually makes any sense no matter what show or movie we're watching. Yeah, even that one you're thinking of right now is goofy when it comes to that, when you really get down to it. But there is something that happens in this episode that makes less than no sense. It makes negative sense. And that's that the chronometers on the ship start going backward when the ship is going backwards in time. This happened at the end of Naked Time, too, and more on that later, but it just doesn't make sense that this would happen. Now, there's no point in going into why. Yous all know why, but I gotta point it out. Also, the beaming people into themselves before they were beamed out in the first place, along with why isn't the Enterprise there anymore when Christopher beams back, or Kirk and Sulu in the server room when the Sarge gets beamed back, and why does that process seem to erase their memories? All of that is pretty goofy, and there's not even an attempt to really explain it in such a way that doesn't cause more problems than it solves. But this is one of those things where we go with the MST3K rule. It's just a show, and we should really just relax. When the episode is as entertaining as this one is, that stuff don't really matter. Now, it's pretty hilarious how often someone on Star Trek expresses astonishment that there are women serving on board. I know that at the time that would have been pretty unusual, but it's funny how often they write how unusual it is into episodes. But listen to the music cue when Christopher sees his first female crewman.
Good morning, Captain.
Good morning, Captain.
A woman?
Crewman.
What the heck is with the stripper music? I mean, I guess it's trying to communicate things from Christopher's perspective, but come on. That undercuts the whole men and women are seen as equals in the future concept if you're playing that kind of music when a lady crewman shows up. Ruminations. This concept was originally proposed as a second part of the Naked Time. If you recall, at the end of that episode, the Enterprise is hurled back in time 3 days because of the controlled implosion procedure that restarted the Enterprise's engines in less than 30 minutes. Instead of 3 days, they would have gone back to the 1960s, and something like what happened in this episode would have taken place. That never happened, obviously, and that story wasn't really fleshed out anyway, but it would have been great if this script was the second half of that story. Now, this is the second script by Dorothy D.C. Fontana. Her first, if you'll recall, was Charlie X. Now, a lot of sources will say that this story originated from a memo written by Bob Justman, who proposed a story like this back in April of 1966, before even The Naked Time was written. He outlined in there the whole crisis about changing the past, endangering the ship and crew's existence in the future, and having to go through an adventure to put things right again. Fontana claims she never saw that memo and that this story was developed entirely out of her own imagination. I'm inclined to believe her. After all, she'll prove to be a consistently excellent writer, and she don't seem the kind to just steal an idea and claim she didn't. Especially since Justman's memo was just an idea that was intended to be taken and developed into a script. So there's really no need to lie about it. And also, this kind of story has been a science fiction staple since at least H.G. Wells' The Time Machine, you know? Not to mention, this premise will be revisited another time in this season alone, and then multiple times after that in the various iterations of Star Trek. Now, one of the things I raved about with Charlie X was that she made Charlie a relatable character. You really saw an awkward kid trying to fit in and get people to like him, but not knowing what the rules are and taking every social setback straight to heart and kind of freaking out about it. We've all been there at one point or another. The same thing is present in this script and really looks to be a major strength in Fontana's writing. The dialogue is genuine and the actors really seem to enjoy delivering the lines. Kirk, Spock, McCoy, and Christopher in particular are really just genuine in this episode. There ain't a better word for it. When Christopher finds out that he's going to have another kid and that kid's going to be a hero, you can't help but smile at his reaction. Actor Roger Perry had a son who was 7 or 8 years old at the time, so he's able to really call upon real-life experience to sell that dialogue too. The humor is genuinely funny and all the dialogue is natural and well-crafted. And the bit with the phone sex operator computer is fun too. I like how it serves to communicate to Christopher that the future ain't perfect, and that really motivates him to feel more at ease and less intimidated by his situation. Really good stuff there. A couple of coincidences with this episode. When the crew is listening to the radio broadcast about the first moonshot, it mentions that it happens next Wednesday. Well, the launch of Apollo 11, the first moonshot, literally did happen on a Wednesday. Wednesday, July 16th, 1969. The time was different, but in retrospect, with that information, you can put the events of this episode in the previous week. A less fun coincidence, this episode premiered on January 26th, 1967, the night before the Apollo 1 tragedy that claimed the lives of astronauts Roger Chaffee, Ed White, and Gus Grissom. Kennedy Space Center has an exhibit honoring these heroes, and the name of that exhibit is Ad Astra per Aspera. Those of you who watch Strange New Worlds will know that Ad Astra per Aspera, or To the Stars Through Hardship, was also the motto of Starfleet before the Federation was established. That's a good motto. So there you have it. Tomorrow is yesterday. Such a breath of fresh air after last week's episode, huh? A coherent story, some actual fun being had, and not a trace of a mangy tribblebeard to be found anywhere. What a win. What did you think about this episode? Let me know down in the comments. If you're digging the show, do please hit that like button. Really helps the channel out. And subscribe if you haven't already. And remember, if you're in the position to help the channel out monetarily, we got channel memberships, the merch store, and the thanks button. Lots of options. But honestly, I'm just happy you decided to watch some stuff with me, Possum Rob. Coming up next, the crew encounter a society that appears to be stuck in the equivalent of the late 19th century on Earth, and everybody is in some kind of cult. To make matters worse, some of the crew join up. Kirk and the gang gotta get to the bottom of this, or they're all gonna get sucked in. Join us next time for the Return of the Archons. Until then, possum friends are awesome friends. Take it easy, alright? Later.
Hey!